Hi, Shelley. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Anya. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Would you please go ahead and share how you got into this line of work? And, I know there's so much to talk about, but how did you get into it? And why is good postpartum care so important for moms?
Absolutely. I'll start with how I got into it. Actually, I became a mom really young.
Mm.
So I went through 1 year of college, but I was only 18 when I got pregnant. And so my then boyfriend, husband now, today still, um, we were like, well, I guess we're just going to have a baby and finish school. But I felt it was very strange because I don't come from a family of like home birth people or anything. Like I randomly just was like, wow, I want to have a home birth. When I got pregnant, it just came out of nowhere. This is back in 1991. And anyways, my husband, we were students in school and um, we had the baby and I didn't actually have a home birth, but I did have a midwife. And I just loved giving birth. And then my husband actually he's a first generation Pakistani. And so because we were young students, we lived with his mom. And his mom took care of me like a South Asian, or not South Asian, Asian mother would take care of her daughter or daughter-in-law after birth. And I didn't know this back in 1991 that I got fed like the proper foods. I just rested. I didn't have to do anything. They took care of everything in the household, no pressure to go back to work because I was a college student. And so I had an amazing postpartum experience. And then when my second baby was born, the midwife came to do a home visit at 2 days when the baby was 2 days old. And she looked around the house. My sister-in-law lived there, my brother-in-law lived there, my mother-in-law, my husband. And, I had all this help. And she looked around and she was like, do you just have all these people helping you? And I'm like, well, yeah. She's like, well, because whenever I go to a home visit, it's the mom's running after a toddler with her newborn baby and she's fending for herself. And in 1990, that was 1995, I did not know what the reality was for everybody else. And so that planted a seed in me. Like I felt this compassion in me. I was like, how can anybody do this without the help of their family? And so that stayed with me. And then I got lost into motherhood and I never actually finished my degree. I went back to school, for different things. I thought I wanted to be a midwife. But eventually, after the birth of my third son in 2006, I had been practicing a lot of yoga. So I did prenatal yoga training and I entered the birth world in 2007 as a prenatal yoga teacher and then a birth doula and birth trauma work. And then I really started doing the postpartum care very, very deeply, the way that I was cared for. And yeah, so that's kind of how I got into the work. And now I've been doing the work for over 15 years now.
And so, what exactly does it look like when you go into a home? Like, what do you do for the mom?
Yeah, so for me, I never actually took any of the traditional postpartum doula trainings like Kappa or Dona. And the reason for that was because I would look over their curriculum and I didn't really understand it. Like I didn't understand like how is this helping the mother? Like to me, it felt like a lot of it was like baby care or like helping the mom take care of the baby. And so it just never really resonated with me. I know they do much more than that. They help with breastfeeding support, and I have a lot of friends who are postpartum doulas. But like I wanted to learn how to massage the mother. I knew that that was important. I wanted to bind her belly. I knew that was important. I wanted to feed her the right foods. I knew that was important. And I never saw any of these things in those trainings. So I what I started doing was I just started doing it like how I felt like it needed to be done, quite
Yeah,
honestly.
that's really great. Just intuitive. You did what you thought was really important. Yeah, and that is so great.
Yeah, so I took a few trainings here and there that like resonated with me. We had a local midwife in town who teaches belly binding and like womb massage. And so I did learn a lot of beautiful techniques from her. And then, yeah, I took also took a training called from the Center for Sacred Window Studies. And even though I had already been feeding postpartum moms a proper food for many years, this training does have, they teach you how to feed moms from an Ayurvedic perspective. So
Mm.
India, like kind of like the yoga of food for postpartum moms. So I took that training and that was really helpful as well. That was an online training. But for the most part, I have, created my own methodology for caring for a mother after birth that draws from really like ancient ways that maternal elders all over the world, non-Western societies, India, Asia, China, Indonesia, Africa, Latin America, all of these, Mexico, all of these countries have the wisdom of maternal elders who have fed soups and stews to their daughters and daughters-in-laws, bound their bellies, made them stay in bed for 40 days. These traditions, which also my mother-in-law, wasn't super strict, but I did receive that type of care. That's how I started caring for mothers. And so what that would look like, if you'd like to hear what that looks like.
Yes, definitely. And sorry to interrupt, but one thing, I had a friend when I lived in Hawaii, she didn't leave her house also for 40 days, but I don't really understand where the number 40 comes from. So why is it 40 days?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's so interesting because it really is universal. All across the world, all these cultures, even before there was, the internet where we could all communicate and share like, hey, 40 days is a good time to like let the mom go out. They already had this. In fact, the word quarantine comes from the Spanish word like la cuarentena, something like that. I'm sure people can correct me. I'm probably off, but which means like to quarantine the mothers. So it comes from quarantining postpartum mothers for 40 days. And the reason why it's 40 days is because the birth process, 9 months of pregnancy and then the birth, it completely, every cell in the mother's body is completely regenerated anew, and it takes 40 days to rebuild the mother's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and energetic bodies. And the biggest thing is that it actually takes 40 days physiologically for the uterus to go from the size of a watermelon back down to the pre-pregnancy size of a pear. So and as that the uterus is shrinking back down, you can imagine like the bones of her pelvis are also stretched out like they were during pregnancy. Those ligaments that support those joints are still stretched out. So her pelvis is very vulnerable. If, a mom might feel really strong when she's 3 weeks old and say, oh yeah, I want to go for a walk. I can take the baby in the stroller and go out for a mile. That's no big deal. I'm in decent shape. But no, she comes back after a walk, just an innocent walk, and might have pelvic pain for the rest of the day or back pain tomorrow, because it's very deceptive. We think we're strong, but the bones and the body, her organs have shifted. They've moved, like her intestines and her liver and her, lungs, even her heart. All of those organs over the course of 9 months have moved to accommodate the baby. They still haven't gotten back to their, like that alignment in their body. So too much activity, it just slows down the healing process. It can re-injure you very, very easily, especially if you have a lot of birth injuries. And that's just the physical. The mental toll, because what's happening is the maternal brain is also being resculpted. She is no longer the woman who she was. Her brain is now forming new neural pathways to teach her how to nurture, We're wired for this. But when we have a lot of stress, when we're forced to be in our prefrontal cortex, which is where we, where we are right now, where we are when we go to work, when we're doing our taxes, we're in this part of our brain that's very like rational, logical. But that is not where a mother is supposed to be. She's supposed to be in her amygdala. It's the part of the brain where she learns empathy and compassion and caregiving and nurturing, that mothering instinct. So birth just blasts your brain open. And then these neural pathways are sending all that mental energy into your amygdala so you can attach and bond with your baby. So when a mom goes out and she's grocery shopping and she's driving and she's chatting and socializing with people, it forces her out of that place of nurturing into the everyday like chatty brain, and it causes a disconnect,
Oh, that's such a good explanation, and how fascinating how women's bodies work is fascinating.
Yeah, there's one story I'm going to tell you. I had a mom whose baby was 3 weeks old, and I explained this. I went to go give her a massage, and I've explained what's happening in her brain. For whatever reason, it came up in our conversation. I explained what's happening in her brain, and she was like, oh my God. She goes, Shelley, she goes, that makes so much sense, because one day my baby was like crying and crying and crying. And I was so focused on like trying to soothe the baby that my husband walked into the room and he started talking to me. He was like, oh, hey, did you check that email? Did you know? Da, 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 da. And like, I literally could not even hear him. Like those words, that part of my brain that could receive whatever he was talking about didn't even come into my brain. I was so laser focused on taking care of my baby. And that's what happens we're wired for caregiving, and nothing else will even get in if it's not pertinent to keeping our babies alive.
That's beautiful. Wow. But yeah, so I think, I don't know if many people out there understand this. I think
Yeah.
that's the problem, right? If
Mhm.
we all knew this, care would probably already look way different.
And our medical society even like promotes, like they'll say, oh, you should be going for walks every day, even with a 2-day-old baby. They don't look down on, like I had one of my clients tell me, Shelley, I thought I'd be fine socializing. I went to visit a friend with my newborn baby at 2 weeks old. And I just got like really stressed out suddenly. Like I had to go in the bedroom. I had to like I couldn't handle the social interaction. And that's why, but we aren't teaching moms these things. So that's what the quarantine does. That's 40 days at home. So those brain changes can actually happen in a very peaceful and cohesive way so that we can attach and bond with our baby.
And then breastfeeding and all these other potential problems are probably going to be resolved much easier if you.
Yes, it's simple. It's a simple hormonal equation, right? What we need is oxytocin. Oxytocin is the hormone of love and connection. It's also one of the main contributors to lactation. When we are well taken care of, when we're resting in bed, someone's bringing us this nourishing food in bed, someone's massaging us every day, we don't have to worry about any household duties. Someone's cleaning, taking care of the other kids. Like all we have to do is focus on rest, healing, and bonding with our baby. Then you have a lot of oxytocin flowing. So breastfeeding issues are a lot less, healing happens faster, and you just fall in love with your baby. So what happens? But when we don't have that support network to provide that for us, what we get is a lot of stress. And stress is cortisol. When cortisol is flowing, that prevents oxytocin from flowing. So our lifestyle right now is a lot of stress for moms in our culture. A lot of cortisol going on.
Definitely, yeah, because I mean, it seems like most women it's encouraged to get back into your real life and back into your routine from before the baby and get out of the house and manage all the things independently as soon as possible. That's almost what it seems like.
Yes, we do. We are a society that values productivity. It values material gain. It values advancing our careers. And along the way, with all of the industrialization of birth, postpartum was industrialized, everything's been industrialized. And so we value these things. And in that process of, you know, proving women, like all of us, proving that we can all have, you know, high level careers, we have lost the value of taking care of mothers and of rest and slowing down.
And I think like giving birth is such a big event to a woman, like to process all of that. And then to, depending how your birth went, what kind of complications there were potentially, but it affects like your mental health, your emotional health so much. And then when you on top of that have the pressure to do it all again after a month or 6 weeks, it's so much. I think the long-term effects are just tremendous, right? You probably know much more. And also I'm curious, like, how does it affect the babies? Do you see that the babies are calmer and probably breastfeed, sleep better when the mom is well taken care of? Do you see a difference?
I mean, I think I do, you know, but I'm not there for the whole year. You know, I'm usually there for anywhere between however long my contract is, like 2, 3 to 6 weeks, the full 6 weeks. And of course, the babies have their rhythms where they have sleepless nights, and you know, the moms still. The thing is that the moms are still it's still challenging, even though they have exquisite care. It's challenging, but it's so much possible and so much easier when you're well cared for. But yeah, I think the babies, you know, I wouldn't say that they would sleep any better or worse. Like, I can't really speak to that, or that they're more calm and happy and peaceful, probably. But what that first 6 weeks is just challenging in general. Like, babies just, some babies sleep, some babies don't. Like, some babies have better temperaments than others. But when the moms are peaceful and their oxytocin is flowing, it absolutely must contribute to how well the babies are. Oh, one thing I can say is, I just was telling this to one of my massage clients the other day, whose baby was only like 3 weeks old, is this is something in Ayurveda, so the 5,000-year-old health system in India is yoga Ayurveda. And in Ayurveda, what they say is that the babies, both the mother and the baby's energy bodies, don't actually fully sublimate after the birth into the physical body until after the first 6 weeks. So another reason why that 40 days is really important. So like when you have a little tiny newborn baby and you take them out into the crowds, they don't have a shield to protect them from other people's energy. So they can,
wow, that's so interesting.
They can very easily absorb other people's energy. So if, like what you told me, your story about how you put your baby in your Moby pack and kept your baby close so that nobody even knew you had the baby, that was a shield you were protecting your baby from. So that was really a wise thing to do when you go out with a newborn. But when I told my client this, she was like, oh my gosh, Shelley, no wonder, because the other day we had like all these people come over, and it was like kind of like a typical socializing, like activity. And it was too much for me, but I noticed like the baby was so cranky, like that whole day.
Yes, I remember that the baby, my babies, both of them, after like big days, they would be overwhelmed. They wouldn't sleep well. I feel like the newborn babies go through all these cycles, like they sleep solid for a couple of days and then all of a sudden they wake up again. But in general, they seemed different after big days of events and other people around them. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So the more like quiet and low stimulation and peaceful the home is, again, the mother's brain is also able to settle. The baby's energy body can settle. And it would be great to see research on this because I'm sure it's very impactful.
And besides physically caring for the mother by like massaging, feeding them good foods, do you also go into like their birth stories, like potential drama? Do you address that during the first 40 days or however long you work with them?
Absolutely. That is one of the foundational aspects of the caregiving that I do. Because of course, the mental, I always say the mental health, the mental body is equally as important, like the mental and emotional body is equally as important as the physical body, right? So we want mothers to be physically alive, obviously. We can still do a better job of making sure that happens. Another episode.
Yes, we need a whole episode on that. Yes.
Yeah, but what we do not even understand is if she's physically alive, great, but if she's mentally and emotionally not okay, that impacts the mental health of the entire family and society, honestly. So the birth is the most massive event a woman will go through in her life, one of them. And it's filled with beautiful moments and challenging moments.
Mm-hmm.
Every single birth, no matter how traumatic a birth is, there's beautiful moments and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And it needs to be processed.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a background and training in helping women process that. And the sooner you do it, Anya, it's so much more effective for grounding the mother mentally and emotionally. Because you can imagine, she had this crazy wild birth, wasn't expecting any of these things to happen. She goes home and now she's suddenly thrown into like breastfeeding and healing and life at home. And there's no time to process it. So what happens is it's like it's still charged in her body, in her system, in her cells. Stories are in our wombs, they're in our bodies, in our pelvis. And so, there's no time to process it. So maybe like finally a year later, when it's like, okay, I should probably go see a therapist, by then, a lot of maybe some of those little moments that were like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have done that, or ooh, I wish I would have done this differently. Those moments have become, she's kind of unconsciously like made meaning of those.
It's yeah.
Like
yeah.
the meaning could be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have got that epidural. Oh,
That reminds me, it's like a core memory, I think is what it's called, right? When like something happens to someone in childhood and you make that the story. So you walk through life and this is the story you made out of something. Is that?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. So like we're becoming a mother, we're a newborn mother, right? We're a child mother. And these are the stories of this new iteration of ourselves. So if we feel shame, like, oh, I learned about how bad epidurals were in my birth class and I don't want one. And then for whatever reason, it was the next best thing for you. But you're telling yourself like, oh, my body failed, I failed. And then that becomes shame. And then that is what we hold in our body. And so then we can feel that can carry out in other ways in our mothering. Like if I didn't birth right, then am I even a good mother? Like
it's heartbreaking, but it makes a lot of sense what you're saying.
So if you have a wise woman who knows how to help listen to that, like let's learn to like shift that narrative. While it's still alive, then it doesn't become as consecrated in who you're becoming as a mother.
See, that shows how important this work is you do. We already talked about, we can't go into detail, that would be a whole nother episode, but like the healthcare system, this shouldn't be optional. Like this should all be required for the mom's mental, emotional, physical health. And like you said earlier, it affects the whole family, the baby, like it's so important. So I quickly want to touch on like postpartum depression. So do you think that is the risk for postpartum depression is increased if the mom is not well taken care of? Do you see that? Or
I do. And I can, I can speak from my own personal experience taking care of moms. I can speak from my personal experience birthing 3 babies. And then you can also do some research. You can see that cultures and societies that still have these caregiving traditions intact, the 40-day quarantine, the massages every day, the caring for the mother and feeding her in the way that I do, they have extremely low postpartum depression rates in those societies. And for me, my track record is, it's pretty impeccable. And to be honest, like I'll just tell you this, that, we have created this narrative in our society that postpartum, all the moms are going to get the baby blues, right? The first 2 weeks after birth is like, you're like 80% of moms get the baby blues. And the clients that I care for don't get the baby blues. And I'll tell you why. Because what we have done in our society is we have said, oh yeah, it's your hormones. They're all out of whack. We've pretty much placed the blame back onto the female body, that it's flawed. And that's not the case. The truth is that our society is flawed. We don't know how to take care of a mother those first 2 weeks after birth.
Yes.
The food she eats, like that balances her hormones, right? Like they just eat a lasagna. Like you can't digest a lasagna at 3 days postpartum. Like you need foods that are going to balance, your hormones and help you heal. You need the touch and the caregiving. And so the hormones of the mothers that I care for, there's so much oxytocin. They're like going crazy. Like their hormones are, yes, they're fluctuating, but there's no baby blues because they're being treated like queens.
So important. And I know you mentioned earlier your cookbook. So can you quickly tell us what it's called, where people can find your cookbook? And then I also know you're working on a course that's coming up or coming out soon, right? Can you go a little bit into that?
Yeah. And the first thing is, if you go to my Instagram handle, I have a free ebook, and that is the meal that I feed a mom right after birth. Immediately, I pack it and I bring it to the hospital, so she eats this beautiful, perfectly curated meal for her vulnerable body for the first couple of days after birth. So that's the first thing you can do, is get started on nutrition right away, and that's a 45-page ebook that teaches you why these foods are really important. And then I've written my methodology for feeding moms and all of my 150 recipes. However, I have not published it yet. I was seeking traditional publishing, and so I'm kind of waiting to get picked up by a publisher. But in the meantime, what I have created is a freezer plan. So so then you can continue after the post-birth recovery meal plan. You could continue with this ebook that can help you for the next 2 weeks with my methodology. And then the online course is going to be launched hopefully this fall. It's all about caregiving. So it's going to have, how to massage a mom, how to bind her belly, how to feed her, how to listen to her birth story, how to make her home a sanctuary for rest, and all these things. And in that course, I will have a good chunk of my cookbook for like the whole menu for the first, I'm not sure if it'll be like 1 or 2 or 3 weeks yet, but a lot more will be available in the course.
Yeah, I'm going to make sure we link all of this super helpful and a lot of practical tips, especially all the cooking. Like, it's so important that, you know, the supporting family can quickly see what they can make to best support the mom. Yeah, thank you so much. Again, we talked a little bit before we started recording. I think we might have to do a follow-up episode and go deeper, because there's just so much. But I think the work you do is so important and helping so many moms. And yeah, thank you for coming on and sharing this with us.
Oh, thank
Really
you. Yeah, thank you, Anya. It's been really wonderful speaking with you.